Why does SKT T1 keep winning? So I got asked this question a lot, and I want to break it down. I get asked this question a lot, and I want to explain it once and for all in the complex way that it deserves. So there are several reasons why Korea is ahead. Let's dial back the time machine, go back to Brood War, where they really got into esport and the infrastructure built up. Okay? Now, I want you to understand Korean culture in terms of how ecosystem-oriented they approach problems, right? So when you have a job in Korea, and in Japan for that matter, it's kind of not good enough for society that it's just a job with a dead end. Most jobs need to be under the kind of philosophy of lifetime employment. Like this goes into this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, and you have a purpose in society all the way up till your retirement date, and that you keep scaling up. And so, obviously, when they started building esport, they started with this very top-down ecosystem approach, where when a player graduates from being a player, what do? Well, they work in esport, right? So they become a coach or a part of management or a part of marketing or a part of esport, the business of esport, right? They built the business of esport very rapidly. And then so let's say you become a player, so then you become an assistant coach. And then you become a coach. And then you become a manager. And, a coach manager, like a head coach. And then you become, a manager of a squad or team or division. Then you become an executive, then you go into the marketing side, or you get moved around to different teams, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this natural progression that kind of happens in most fields of business in Korea and in Japan. And what I saw when they started developing esport, transferring it from Brood War into StarCraft 2 was a very similar kind of approach. By the way, then there's also junior players too, right? Because underneath the starting players, there has to be the farm team, and below that, there's the recruitment layer, right? So you have this whole entire ecosystem. And so what happens is you have mentorship at every level, from the starting players mentoring to the farm players, from the assistant coaches to the players, from the coaches to the assistant coaches, from the head coaches to the coaches, from the managers to the head coaches, from the executives. Maybe they aren't experienced enough to be executives and mentor yet, but they might provide sage wisdom, or at the very least guidance. And so you have this very natural development path and growth path that takes place over years. Okay, so first thing is, this is in place, which leads to the development of a larger surplus of talented management and coaching infrastructure, and also better talent recruitment for the farm teams. Now, I want to touch on the farm team because this is 99% of the reason that Korea is ahead in League of Legends. If you look at the bell curve of distribution, you have to assume that the bigger the bell curve, the higher the top end. That's why China has, mechanical prowess players, and Korea has a large population, and EU has a large population on the surface, and that's why they have mechanically talented players that are often, exported elsewhere in the world. Now, the thing that Korea does is they concentrate more of the top end of the bell curve into the pro sphere. So what they do is they recruit players from the ladder, and they put them in sister teams at first, right? So it would be like every single team in the champions had a sister team. So there were 10 players, plus a couple more in the farm squad as well, and subs, because they just had more money. They had so much more money, so they could hire 10 players. And, by the way, pricing was tiered. So if you look at how they structured their ecosystem, it was just like a business, a corporation, right? So the executives made the most money, then the managers, then the head coaches. And I mean managers as in the management, not like a team manager like in the West, okay? So management, then head coach, then assistant coach, and player, and then, subs. So that was the way that pay went, which, by the way, do you remember the exodus that happened from Korea to China? That was like a protest of the system, saying, hello, we're the people who are making you the money here in this player medium, and so we're going to go where the salaries are rewarded. And so they exodus, and Korea went, oh shoot, maybe we can't structure the salaries so tight in terms of, the coaches are making more than players. Maybe it needs to be a little bit the other way around, except when you start getting superstar coaches who can develop those players. So first they said, we don't care, we can develop our players. So they did. But then they also raised salaries kind of across the board, and probably they boosted salaries for players as well, as they started realizing that this is star talent, and that lured kind of people back. The equity is certainly not there in terms of pay with China, but the the environment is far more suitable for professional play, I believe, in Korea than in China right now, because of their approach to esport this entire way, and this kind of like infrastructure first, ecosystem first approach that subjugates the player below that, to the player's benefit. Luckily, in North America, this might be happening to the player's detriment because we didn't have this natural progression, from sub to starter to assistant coach to head coach, and so we don't have the coaching talent in North America and in Europe to drive 6 to 8 high-quality teams that can compete against each other and drive the level of everybody up. Okay, so anyway, going back to what Korea is doing with the sister teams. So they recruit 10 to 15 people for their rosters. They're training internally to keep stuff secret, and then they're having the players all compete for the starting roles, right? So what this creates is a pressure cooker. Instead of 10 teams with 5 players each all competing against each other for starting positions, you have, 6 to 8 teams. I don't remember how many were in the original champions. I don't think it was 10. I think it was 6 or 8 with sister teams and farm squads, and they're all competing, and you're recruiting a lot more people, and because they're all in Seoul, if they want to make a future for themselves, and they're all accessible, they just board them together, and they say, okay, all of you come into this house and live together and train together, and we'll stick an assistant coach with you to mentor you. And then what you have here is this insane pressure cooker of competitive juice and talent that's kind of like trying to drive everybody up to the starting roles. And that is why, despite the fact that server population might be lower than China and at parity with EU, a lot of times the mechanical prowess of the players just entering the league is higher because they're entering this pressure cooker, which takes the top of the bell curve and like squishes it together and tries to make a neutron star out of it, and then takes the best atoms from it as their starters. So first of all, we have the ecosystem approach, which leads to really high quality, like middle tier management and talent there in the coaching roles across the board. I don't mean like the 1-star coach. Like Koma's amazing, right? He's the best coach in the world. But he is that because he's coaching against all these other coaches that are actually talented enough to steer their teams to a high level of play that then they train against. Okay, so we have this ecosystem approach. Then we have the concentration of talent in the pressure cooker. And then we have, and then we have the competition, which is because now we're forced to train against our competitors, you can only ever get a certain percentage better than the person you're training against, unless you have an ideal to study against that you can shadow box with. But it's really hard to shadow box when you're an 18-year-old to 20-year-old in a team game of League of Legends that is as complex as it is. It's really hard to like play a scrim and say like, oh, we're actually playing that team over there. And if we had done this with, there's how many hundreds of champions? There's like 100 X champions in the game now. Every situation is so different. The game is so complex and involves so many niceties and different game statuses that it's incredibly unlikely that you will ever enter a similar game state to any other shadow or model that you look at in any other pro sphere. So you're basically committed to training the scenario that is in front of you with your training partner, and you can at the most get a bunch of abstract scenarios that you're trying to practice and that you're trying to inflict upon them. And you can certainly plan those out, but you can't plan their reaction to it and how they're going to punish you or not. And by the way, the brain, by default, learns most things experientially. So punishment and getting punished for a mistake is really good. There's a part of your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, which fires when you make these kind of mistakes and actually releases neurotransmitters that are components to rewiring your neurons and learning from that, for a number of seconds after your brain kind of recognizes a mistake. So this is a very natural way of learning. And if you aren't getting punished for those mistakes, like you are in a region with more competition, then learning is slowed because it has to be more abstract, it has to be more deliberate, it has to be more explicit learning, and you have to be more intentional about structuring the scrimmage in a way that the learning happens. So that is a real challenge. And it's a challenge that teams outside of Korea have not overcome yet. And even I think some teams inside Korea are struggling with this because it's really difficult to structure training in League of Legends. We don't have a lot of training tools. We don't have a lot of equity in terms of training partners. So we have this very kind of like 50-50 selfish compromise with our opponents where we want to get the most out and they want to get the most out, and we have to negotiate a reality between us where we both get to learn. without giving too much away, and also kind of benefiting us most because we're spending our money on our team and they're spending their money on their team, right? And yeah, so it's suboptimal, you would say. So those are the many reasons, or the three kind of TLDW reasons are ecosystem approach that leads to the development of better like leadership, the across the board, right? So I'm not talking about singular leadership. Like, I think TSM has fantastic coaching and fantastic leadership. The problem is 7, 8, 5 of the other LCS teams don't, and therefore they're not pushing up from the bottom, and they can't challenge. They can't create an ecosystem where the coaches are competing for jobs, and they're more high quality, and the top and the managers and all of these people are competing for jobs, and they're not really, really top quality and being pushed at their game like every single day. Okay, so anyway, there's the ecosystem approach. There's the fact that the bell curve is bigger in Korea because the player population is larger, plus the fact that Korea condenses it into a pressure cooker at the top because everybody's located centrally in Seoul, and so they create these farm teams, which originated out of the sister team approach, which they did because it's smart. And then the third one I said, which is competition, that you can really only get as good as the competition that you train against, percentage better than that, unless you have this incredibly well-developed explicit learning system, and that is really hard to pull off in League of Legends because lack of training tools and lack of knowledge of how to do it. And then I think the fact that we're going for more or less endemic coaching, so we're not taking a lot of coaching from outside the scene from traditional sport because it just hasn't worked very well, because not a lot of traditional sport coaches are like me and are willing to coach themselves to diamond before they start coaching League of Legends. So they're just like, oh yeah, I'll just come and coach League, and I don't know much about it, but I'll try. And so, like, because we're doing endemic coaches, or coaches from within the scene, we have to develop that skill. So normally in traditional sport, where the coach is 100% on the hook for every result and every performance, in esport, you put the coach on the hook for that, but then you can't fire them and hire anybody else because there's nobody else to hire. You have to focus on developing them as well, using your pro players to kind of teach your coach, and then having them outlast the roster and develop across many rosters as a better and better coach. So yeah, these are all the reasons that Korea has an edge that will likely continue until there's more money in the Western scenes that is focused on building up farm teams, so like secondary leagues. So that's the first thing that kind of needs to happen, to form a pressure cooker that trumps the bell curve difference of our player population, right? So we have a massive player population in China. We have a smaller one in NA. We have a pretty big one in EU. And we have a pretty big one in Korea. But Korea amplifies it, by creating this farm system. So until we have the money and orgs start doing that, it's unlikely that we'll condense enough talent to stop needing to import. And then until we focus on the development of coaching technique and skills and strategy in how to coach League of Legends, we're going to be challenged on the coaching front in terms of behavioral change. I don't mean the draft, okay? That's like a tactical thing. I'm talking about behavior change over time, learning from mistakes. There are a lot of players. I was talking to some players on a team where they said, yeah, we know all the mistakes we're making. We can look at this game and now we understand it. We just keep making the same mistakes. We just don't know how to remember in game to choreograph ourselves in a way that leads to the development of the habits that on stage will produce the same result. And that's the real challenge, is that behavioral modification and wiring up of instinctive sport response is hard. It's a visual spatial reaction where you see a pattern and you instantly know what to do and then you do it. And that requires a certain kind of training and habituating and volume that players, although they're objectively able to see from a VOD, after the game, deploying it in the game and in the scrim and then on the stage is fundamentally different. It takes even a different part of the brain, right? You're not logicking out and reasoning in it from a full view of the game. You're kind of interpreting it from your imperfect information while playing the game, along with the same time that you're laning and all these other inputs are coming in. So that is the real challenge of coaching. And by the way, one of the reasons I was making this video was to promote the launch of my coaching school. So I had this coaching school that I started with a bunch of kind of friends in 2014 or 15. We launched 3 live conferences, which were moderately successful, and started the development of a curriculum for a certification program for esport coaching. Esport coaching, so across all esport, and then we're going to develop modules specific to League of Legends, for example, and Overwatch and CS:GO after the beta launch. But now that was put on hold while I went and coached TSM, and it was put on hold while I was working with league coaching, and now we're relaunching it with shadow.gg, and we're going to fully fund the first 30 applicants that we want to take into the program. So I'm going to put a link to the application down below. You can go and you can fill it out, and we're going to take the 30 most promising applicants, and we're going to subsidize this program, which, by the way, please make sure you have enough time to complete this program. It's based on the coaching curriculum of one of the best sport universities in the world, the University of Jyväskylä. Sports science university. They're not the best sport university like competition. They're one of the best sports science university in terms of research and publication and education. It's out there, and then they developed a curriculum for their 4-year coaching degree, and we adapted it and modified it over a 2-year period with myself and a number of other experts for the field of esport coaching. And I'm very excited that this is going to be, one of the big things that I'm working on next in terms of like what I'm doing outside of G2, because my vision when I came into esport in 2012 was that I wanted to focus on the coaching layer in the long run. I wanted to focus on the professionalization of the coaching layer in esport, and I wanted to really start tackling not just the professional layer, but the amateur level too, like amateur level coaching, and what it is that we can do as coaches at the amateur level to develop players in a holistic way, so that maybe if you play esport for 5 to 10 to 15 years as you're growing up and you don't end up going pro, that all that time is not wasted, that it's actually beneficial for you and your development and your health, or the players, your development health. And that's the role of the coach, to engineer that environment where players learn transferable life skills and competitive skills and coping mechanisms that apply not only in their esport training that they're doing as a hobby, as an amateur, but also in other aspects of life that they can transfer it over. So please look at the link below. It's a Google form. I'm using Google Forms for this. And so it's going to ask you for a number of information, demographic information, and then some questions. And we're going to look at the applicants, and we're going to pick the 30 best ones, and we're going to start the first cohort and graduate you guys over the next 3 months with a certification for esport coaching from Shadow.gg. Now, if you don't make the program, still go through the application and make sure your email address is in there, because I'm going to send the 10 or 11 beta training workshops that we ran over a 12-week period 2 years ago with our esportcoaching.net. I'm going to send out those videos to you as like a free primer and a free example of what we're doing. And because these videos, I think, still hold a lot of value and are very golden in terms of their content. And I'll make sure that those go out to you in a very structured way. Even if you don't make the program, you can at least get access to the videos. So make sure that if you're interested at all and you think, I'm not qualified, or I'm looking at this application and I don't think I'm going to make it, whatever, apply anyway, and you'll be on the list, and then I'll send you the videos no matter what. All right. See you guys next time.